What happens when you combine a hungry young manager, a striker ready to step out of the shadows to become a shining light, and a mercurial talent ready to become one of the best the game has ever seen? Magic. And while this Liverpool side is often remembered for one of the most infamous moments in league history, that completely ignores the levels the Reds reached throughout the seasons, and the tactical ingenuity of Rodgers, which took them to within a hair's breadth of the title. But not today, because this is the tale of how Rodgers' men became one of the most underrated sides in Premier League history. When Rodgers arrived on Merseyside, there were mixed emotions. Despite showing potential by getting Swansea to the top flight and making them one of the most aesthetically pleasing sides in the league, he was young and inexperienced, and surely he wasn't ready to be the man to wake this sleeping giant. His first season was decent, with the Reds finishing 7th, as he was slowly introducing the possession-based 4-3-3 that had brought him some success before moving to Liverpool. It represented progress, but there was nothing to suggest they would be title challengers less than 12 months later. But the January window of 2012-2013 threatened to change the course of history, but it also showed where Liverpool were at that moment. Chelsea sold Daniel Sturridge to Liverpool without too much concern. After all, Liverpool were not direct title rivals. To top it off, Sturridge was primarily an injury-prone squad player, a good one, but a squad player nonetheless, so they didn't mind receiving the paltry sum of £12 million in return. Rumours of a talented young Brazilian had long been whispered in Europe, but the kid had yet to establish himself and struggled with the physicality of Serie A before being shipped out to Poch's Espanyol. So what chance would he have in an even more physical league? But they would both hit the ground running, with Coutinho scoring 3 and assisting 7 in his opening 13 Premier League matches, while Sturridge was every bit as impressive, with 10 goals and 3 assists in his first 14 league matches. But that was just a precursor of what the next season would bring. At the start of the season, Rodgers began the tactical adaptations that would become a trademark of Liverpool. He shifted from the 4-4-2/4-3-3 he'd been using at the tail end of the prior season. That saw Sturridge as an inside forward, combining expertly with Suarez, who was slightly more withdrawn. But now Suarez was absent because of a ban due to the incident. No, not that incident. Not that incident. No, not that one either. Still the wrong bite. There, the incident. Without their talisman, Sturridge was entrusted to shoulder the responsibility of being the primary forward, with Coutinho on the left providing almost all the creativity. Aspas, the new signing, was floating behind Sturridge, whilst Jordan Henderson was looking unimpressive as a right winger. It was far from the perfect setup for Liverpool, as they lacked natural width, as both of these men wanted to drift into their natural central positions. So the fullbacks had the pressure of flooding forward to provide that width, leaving those gaping holes in the defence, and they struggled to get back in time. To try counteract that, Liverpool were a lot more conservative than we'd ever seen under Rodgers to protect these areas, meaning Liverpool had some of their lowest scoring matches. And this was fine because Sturridge had honed his finishing instincts to become one of the deadliest strikers around. So much so that he scored 4 in the first 4 league matches, the first Liverpool player to achieve this since John Aldridge in 1987. In truth, in these early matches, this Liverpool side did not look like anything special. They were chugging along nicely in 5th, only 2 points off the top of the table. But having finished 7th the prior season, a top 6 finish would have represented good progression, and a Champions League place would have been more than Liverpool fans could have dreamt of. But one man had other ideas. He needed to be immediately integrated back into the first 11, and this is where Rodgers was an underrated tactician. He could have taken the simpler route, defaulting to the 4-3-3 that had given them so much success the prior season, with Sturridge and Coutinho playing narrowly off the flanks. That would have been good, but Rodgers had ambitions for greatness. Coutinho was quickly developing from a prodigy to a magician who was beginning to fulfill his potential, while Sturridge had more than proven himself worthy of consistently starting in his preferred central positions. So Rodgers devised a strategy that would allow the fullbacks to fully commit, so that they would have much more width, without forcing the aging Gerrard to do too much covering behind them. Enter the 3-5-2. It was rare at the time to see a dedicated back three in the Premier League, but Rodgers went for it, meaning his 3 big centre-backs covered the width of the pitch. It would not only provide protection for the fullbacks, who could now bomb on wholeheartedly, it also meant that the midfielders, and Gerrard in particular, could focus on being the metronome in possession. He'd been aging over the past couple of seasons and had slowly begun dropping deeper and deeper, occasionally appearing as a defensive midfielder, but he was still more of a box-to-box midfielder. But this was the season Rodgers fully began to use him as the deepest on-the-ball midfielder, expected to be the quarterback for the team. as Henderson beside him did not have the same passing range. So the combination of 3 centre-backs behind him and a defence-first pivot next to him meant that Gerrard was well insulated and could focus on doing what he does best. But all of this had a knock-on effect on young Philippe Coutinho. No longer was he starting in this advanced left winger role and then drifting infield. Now instead he made his home in the centre of the pitch, where he could focus on orchestrating the play and pulling incredible passes out of nowhere to find a finisher. And Rodgers had given Coutinho 2 elite forwards to aim for, as SAS had been born. Both of these men were incredibly fluid, looking to sniff out the slightest weaknesses in the opposition defence. Both could drop deep, though Suarez was more comfortable here. But both could also move wide, though it was Sturridge who preferred drifting away from the centre when it was too crowded. The two had remarkable synergy and a lack of selfishness, playing off each other brilliantly with intelligent 1-2s that would leave the opposition spinning. But Suarez's creativity in particular shone, as he was a magician, not just with his goal scoring, but also his passing, seeming to find Sturridge's elite movement and ability to run in behind both on the transition as well as against teams who sat in much deeper blocks. In their first 6 games together, the Reds went from scoring a goal a game in the first 5 fixtures to 2.6 per game. Sturridge netted 4 and assisted 2, Suarez assisted 1 and slotted in a further 6. And then, disaster struck. Sturridge went down, a hammer blow to the Reds. The Englishman would be forced to miss the next 19 games across all competitions, with 8 of those being in the league. SAS was broken up. Liverpool's brief title hopes were extinguished, as half their firepower had been taken away, or at least that was the expectation. Because instead, Luis Suarez, if he hadn't already, decided to go Super Saiyan and do the work of 2 elite forwards. Rodgers, rather than force a like-for-like replacement to try and replicate the magic of SAS, opted to revert to a 4-2-3-1, with the insatiable Suarez being the point man. Jose Enrique at left-back had also gone down with injury, and John Flanagan spawned from the youth academy to take his place as a right-footed left-back. Rodgers was still looking for solutions and experimented with Moses on the wings, but with the title potentially on the line, okay performances were no longer enough. Henderson reluctantly moved wide to provide the defensive solidity the Reds needed down the flanks, especially with Glenn Johnson being hyper-aggressive. But Liverpool still needed that sparkle in the attacking third, while maintaining their defensive solidity as they still looked vulnerable at times. So the flair of Coutinho was given up, as Henderson moved into the centre of a more conservative midfield. Coutinho, while not in his preferred position, was still able to provide attacking threat from the left and could still move inside at times, knowing that Flanagan was taking care of him defensively. Liverpool had won back their attacking flair on one side of the pitch, but what of the other? They had an ace up their sleeve, a player who had been making sporadic appearances throughout the season, but was now ready to make his mark on the title race. Raheem Sterling was ready to become a regular, and Rodgers was happy to use him on either flank. He was raw, but what he brought was an element of surprise, and he had great close control to operate in congested spaces, and paired that with incredible acceleration to get away from any defender who got too close. It was clear that he was destined for greatness at 18. In the 8 league matches that Sturridge missed, Sterling stepped up massively, with 3 goals and 2 assists. But all of these were just supporting acts. Without doubt, there was a star of the show in Sturridge's absence, as Luis Suarez fully took control, even wearing the captain's armband for 5 matches. He morphed from an elite forward to the perfect striker. He was a clear focal point, and despite not being particularly quick, he had perfect movement, drifting inside on the defender's blind side to cause danger. But that movement wasn't just about him going in behind. What made him impossible to defend was him finding pockets deep or wide to get on the ball to create for his wingers, and pose the question to the centre-backs, who should be picking him up. All of this was topped off by the ability not just to finish off the simpler chances, but to find shooting and goal-scoring opportunities where there didn't seem to be any. 8 games without Sturridge, 4 assists for Suarez, and 11 goals. Liverpool were no longer just having a bit of early season success or hoping for Champions League qualification. They whispered it quietly, but the Reds had their eyes firmly fixed on the title. It wouldn't be easy, as they sat 6 points off Arsenal after 21 matches, but they had reinforcements quickly arriving. Daniel Sturridge was on the mend, and he made his return against Stoke City, instantly picking up from where he left off, with a goal and an assist in a 24 cameo, with that assist being to his partner in crime. The question was how Rodgers would respond to the return of Sturridge, given the rise of Sterling. Who would miss out so that SAS could be rekindled? The answer was no one. Rodgers would integrate all 4 of his elite attackers into the same formation, occasionally a 4-4-2, but primarily an attacking 4-3-3, with either Sturridge or Suarez Suarez, nominally wide, but drifting central plenty. Rodgers had realized that his team's strength lay in the attacking realm, so it made sense to double down on that instead. So in the 7 matches post-Sturridge return, the Reds scored 24 goals, a ridiculous 3.4 per game. The only problem is they also conceded 12, almost 2 per game. See, this formation left their midfield extremely vulnerable, as the fullbacks still bombed on. Henderson was great at covering large expanses, but Gerrard was no longer in his physical prime, and offering him so little protection here was extremely problematic. If Liverpool were to be considered title challengers, rather than that fun team to watch, he had to make a change. The priority had to now be on having a solid defensive centre, but the one thing that could never be sacrificed was SAS. So they kept the front 2 pairing, while the back 4 was also maintained. But now, rather than prioritising the wider regions, it was a midfield diamond that came to the fore. Gerrard would still be free to orchestrate all of his play from the quarterback-esque position, but he also had 2 midfielders who could do all the running into the wide regions to cover the fullbacks when they moved up, while Joe Allen in particular was more than capable of being an asset with the ball at his feet. But the biggest surprise came at the tip of the diamond. Coutinho looked like he would walk into the role, and he did make a couple of appearances here. But Rodgers opted to put young Raheem Sterling in that position of responsibility due to his amazing form. Sterling meant that they added pace on the transition, which was a vital element of Liverpool's play, as Suarez had additional men to hit. But it also meant that Liverpool had a lot more flexibility in-game, as they could dynamically switch into a front 3 in a 4-3-3, with the midfield melting into a dedicated 3. Liverpool were pushing for the title, and when City visited Anfield, it promised to be a title decider. And Sterling gave the Reds an early lead, with a perfect example of why Rodgers loved the diamond. Suarez fought for the bouncing ball in the deeper regions, drawing Demi out of position, while Sterling made the run in behind to slot home coolly. The 2 giants went back and forth for the rest of the match, but when Coutinho slotted home from a company error, the title seemed to be heading back to Anfield. But not long after, Henderson took a bad touch, leading him to miss 3 of the remaining 4 games. It would prove to be fatal. That could be one of the reasons Liverpool lost out on the title that season. And of course, it's easy to isolate the slip as the only reason for Liverpool's title loss, but the true reasons were varied. And looking at the course of the season, the one element Rodgers was never quite able to figure out was the leaky defense, as no matter which formation he switched to or what personnel were on the pitch, the Reds continued to ship goals by the boatload. In fact, since 2010, only Chelsea in 1920 have conceded more than Liverpool did that season and still finished in the top 4, let alone won the title. The Reds would fall short that year, but their story should never be forgotten in the history of the Premier League.
And if you've gotten this far into the video, you're probably a true tactical nerd. And if you've ever wanted to understand the tactical principles that allow elite teams to function, I've put together a free resource to get you started on your tactical analysis journey. Just click the top link in the description or the comments.
But one team that did not fall short is Klopp's Liverpool. Click on screen now to see the many evolutions of Klopp's Liverpool.